I'm Lisa Murray, and I am the chair of the Seattle North End Clinic. Our presentation tonight is by Bob Stafford, who worked at the BNSF, and he's going to talk about being a yardmaster.
I was train master.
And we're going to hear what it was like for him to work on the railroad.
Okay, tonight's presentation is on the ebb and flow of Everett Terminal in the early 2000s. My name's Bob Stafford. I was terminal train master at Everett. Let's see, from about October of 2000 and into 2007. I think it was when I went to Bellingham. Prior to that, I've been train master at New Westminster, British Columbia. Prior to that, I was assistant train master at Amarillo, Texas. Was division relief train master. I covered every job in the Amarillo division from Kansas all the way to New Mexico and up into Colorado. And I was a yard master at the former Santa Fe yard in La Junta, Colorado. And before that, I worked on a Burlington Northern as an agent operator and then as a yard clerk when they got rid of the agencies. And before that, I worked as an agent operator on Erie, Lackawanna in New Jersey and northeastern Pennsylvania. So that's my railroad background. Tonight, we're going to talk about the ebb and flow of Everett Terminal. Everett Terminal is built on a peninsula. This is an aerial view of Everett, of the city of Everett. And I think we can probably see my mouse here. We can see how the railroad line comes around Everett on the outskirts of Everett here. That was the original line. And then later on, a tunnel was built right across here through town as a shortcut, eliminated all of that. This gives you an idea of the location of Everett in the scheme of things. Everett is basically the crossroads of the Pacific Northwest for all the traffic coming down from the north. Everything feeds in from Canada, from the oil refineries along the coast, and from the different sawmill operations and the interchange with the SRY and at that time, the Canadian Pacific and Sumas, everything just funneled into Everett, along with the traffic coming across the what we call the scenic sub, the original Great Northern Main Line, and traffic flowed up from Portland through Everett to go on up into Canada. So Everett was the crossroads of everything. This will give you a better idea of the layout of Everett. Start up here at from where we saw on our photo there. So along the Snohomish River here is what's called Delta Yard. Great Northern, I think the Great Northern arrived here around 1893, I believe it was. And they come in and they started filling in along the Snohomish River and building a yard there, and it became Delta Yard because it was the river delta. And the GN line came in, and there was the track come around. And on the other side of town, we have what we call Bayside Yard. Bayside Yard was built to support all the industries along the waterway here of Port Gardner Bay. Now, back in the day, there was pulp mills, sawmills, shingle mills, line the entire bay along here, and they're all up on stilts all over the water. You know, later on, it became filled in like it is today. And as we progress down, we can see where at Lowell's where we come in from the east, from Spokane. The line split at Lowell. One track come down here following the river. That was the we call it the NP Main. That was originally the Northern Pacific Main. There was a little yard up here which called the Milwaukee Yard. Milwaukee at one time 6-track yard up here, if I remember right, and the BN bought the Milwaukee land and kept 2 of the tracks in. And then we come down here what we call the C line. SCALINE. That was our connection to get out of Delta and go to the sea. And we come up here, we come up, this was a 1.4% grade. It hit a little stretch of 1.8 right here at PA. Do we call this PA Junction, which was short for Pacific Junction was the actual name for it. And then we headed to track here. This was Great Northern. We called this the GN Main. GN Main went right down alongside Delta Yard and then across the river and went north towards Canada. The Northern Pacific had tracks, used the GN up here to GN Junction where it could come off. We call this track the Rogers Main. And it went in the Northern Pacific one time, went all the way around here also, two rivers paralleling each other to service industries. So this is a good overview of Everett. Okay, we can see where start way out here at Lowell. And we come on down here, we got the sea line, which is at the, it's basically right at the bottom of Pacific Avenue in Everett. And it tracks them up here, we call the PA Junction. At PA Junction is the place where the Amtrak station is today. It's called Everett Station. It's a joint bus and railroad facility. And then GN Junction is right in here, this area here. It's basically just about underneath the interstate bridge that goes across the Snohomish River. And we come into our Delta Yard. And we can see a Rogers Main coming here. And we got Rogers Main comes up here, and then this is the bridge across. This is what we call Bridge 37 on the BNSF. Back in the old GN days, this was Bridge 12, the 12th bridge out of Seattle, north from the North Portal. And you can see the tracks go around here. This is where the long siding is located. And then we come in here to Bayside Yard. And we have Bayside Yard was parallel to all these things there to Port Everett. This is a 1999 photo, so it's current to what I'm talking about. Then we have what we call the storage yard. Storage yard had 3 or 4 tracks in it, and that was the support yard for the Kimberly-Clark paper mill. And then we come down, we had the Boeing Pier, where the barges come in with the Boeing containers on them from Tacoma. And they were loaded on the flat cars here and taken up to the Boeing plant, and this is the Boeing plant up here. And we have Everett Junction. Everett Junction is a place where we call this the low line. It was alongside the river. And then the line up here we call the high line, because they come up here and there's a higher elevation. And then the 2 lines met here at Everett Junction. And then after Everett Junction, we have what we call Howard Park. Howard Park, there was crossovers there along with Everett Junction, and at Howard Park there was a track that paralleled the main line. It ran all the way back to beyond Everett Junction. We called the set out track. That's where the Spokane to Everett every day would back its train into the set out track and leave its train there. And then down at milepost 31, that is where we had the 2 tracks that we used to support the Boeing plant. Anybody know how to get rid of this up here? It's sort of blocking things. No, I don't want to leave the meeting. But anyways, here at milepost 31, there was 2 tracks, and we used them to, that's where the Boeing job would line up cars for pickups by the mainline trains, go east or west, and the mainline trains would set out cars there for the Boeing job. Let's see. And here's a track diagram of everything that I was just talking about. You see Delta Yard. Delta Yard is laid out, most of the tracks at Delta Yard are 3,200 feet each. So basically we could build a 6,000 foot train at Delta by doubling 2 tracks together when the train departed. And we can see how the GN main come right alongside of Delta Yard, went up here to the bridge. And then we had the track that went across here and on into Bayside along siding. Bayside Yard, the yard office, the scale, the storage yard, the Kimberly Clark. Then in this area here, Alcoa Aluminum there's a big dome, it's still there. They got ore boats in from South America. They unloaded them with aluminum ore there. And then it was shipped by rail to the Alcoa plant near the Rock Island Dam, just east of Wenatchee. And then we had Boeing Pier with two tracks going out onto the Boeing Pier. Again, we went up the Sioux line, up the sea line, and then we connected up here, crossed over, and we come into the main line from Chicago. And here at Oaks Avenue, we went into the tunnel, and the tunnel come out right under, basically right underneath West Marine View Drive, and crossed Hewitt Avenue and come down the side of the hill and reconnected down here at Everett Junction. This is an overview of the yard at Delta. As we can see here, you can see how Delta Yard is pretty symmetrical here with all the tracks about the same length. They got the ride. This is called the NP tracks over here were called the Rogers. It was called the Rogers Main. From what I understand, this down in here at one time there was I'm not sure it was a pulp mill or a sawmill. I think it was a pulp mill that was called the Rogers Mill, and that's where the name came from. That's what I've been told. Then we had 2 sidings beside the Rogers Main. The original siding was on the riverside over here. We called that the old Rogers, and then there was a new siding built the other side of the Main. We called that the new Rogers. And this in here is where the Robanco garbage facility is. It's where all the garbage from Snohomish County is loaded onto well cars and sent to Roosevelt, Washington. You see a garbage train is sitting here. That's just pulled the garbage out of here and made his pickup. Probably departing when he took this picture. Then over here, we had our rip tracks were right in here. There was 3 tracks we used for rip tracks. Rip 1, 2, and 3 were over here. The old stock track was over here. One time there were stock pins there. By this time it was being used for maintenance. Away was actually loading ballast there. Ballast was being trucked down from Granite Falls, and it was being dumped here. And then there was a front end loader that was loading it into ballast cars. The old and the maintenance away shop here is the former Great Northern Passenger Car Shop. And then like all names on the railroad never die. The roundhouse back in the day, let's see where my cursor. This area in here is where the roundhouse was back in the days, but it's long gone. But this is the roundhouse tracks down here. The roundhouse tracks consist of the old ice track from the Everett Ice House and the extension of the rip tracks. What we did basically is we took a piece of track out of service here so the locomotives couldn't get into the rip track. The rip track couldn't get into the locomotive facility. The yard office was over here. And then everything came together down below here at the GN Junction. And this will give us a track diagram of what was going on at Bayside. This over here is the north end of the yard. This is West Marine View Drive. And Bayside Yard consisted of the main, and there was 4 tracks next to the main. Each of these tracks was around 5,000 foot long. And then we had the long siding over here. The long siding was used to do the yard-to-yard interchange between Delta Yard and Bayside Yard. The West End third trick crew every night would bring the cars for Bayside into here and leave them, and then would pick up the cars for Delta out of one of these yard tracks and then take them back to Delta Yard on third trick every night. Normally we did that around 2 o'clock in the morning. And then we had the storage yard and the tracks going into Kimberly Clark. Kimberly Clark was a huge paper mill. There's nothing there today. It's this Port Everett kept the warehouse, tore the rest of the mill down because they thought they could repurpose the warehouse to somebody else. And so far, no one's bid on it. This is a picture taken of the south end of Bayside Yard. This would be track number 4, track 3, track 2. And here's sorting out garbage cars. This was the yard office over at Bayside Yard. And then the tunnel. From PA Junction, we went into the tunnel. This is West Marine View Drive right up here. Hewitt Avenue interchange would be here. No, Hewitt Avenue interchange is on this side, and then Everett Avenue interchange is on that side. So this is between those 2 streets. And you can see the top of the tunnel here from West Marine View Drive. And we come out of the tunnel, we pass the Everett Depot, which we always refer to as Bond Street Depot. And come down the High Line, so we had double crossovers at Everett Junction. Come down here to Howard Park. We had our set out track here at Howard Park. And then in here there was a track we called Mill A. Back in the days, this was Weyerhaeuser Mill A was located here. I believe that was a shingle mill. And there was quite a complex of tracks in there. Well, the Port of Everett had this time one track that went back into there. And then milepost 31 is down here. The track nearest to main number 2 here. This is a track where the mainline trains set out. And then track number 2 over here is where the Boeing job lined up the cars and blocked them on each end of the track to go east or west for pickup. At that time, we had cars coming in from Wichita, Kansas, and we had cars coming up from California, and we had cars coming down from Canada into Delta Yard going to Boeing in the early 2000s. This gives you an overall of we call PA Junction. This is the C line coming up to PA. And this was Lowell siding beside the main line. And then there was a switchback track here, and there was a track back in the days to go into this Everett Steel. Now this is all gone. It's all changed around today for this configuration with major changes. And then out at Lowell, the scenic sub main line comes in from Snohomish. And then right here is a crossing called the Brickyard Crossing. At the Brickyard Crossing, there's a switch that forms Lowell siding. It runs all the way up to PA Junction. And then there's a track also comes off there, parallel Lowell siding. It was called the paper mill track. Back there used to be a huge paper mill complex in here. And then there's a switch come off a little siding here, and that was beginning of the NP main. going back towards Delta Yard. And there was a track that come off and sort of went up this way, and we call that the Turkey Trail. The Turkey Trail or track originally went up to the Northern Pacific Freight House, which is where QFC is located at the corner of Broadway and Everett Avenue today. And at this time, the Turkey Trail was being used primarily by the local freight. That operated, we called it the Gold Bar Turn. The Gold Bar Turn on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays went down to Richmond Beach, which is just north of Seattle, to service an asphalt facility down there. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, they went to Monroe, basically to take care of the feed mill there. And it did the interchange as to Homish with the short line railroad that was running the Woodinville sub at that time. And the Milwaukee Road yard was here. There was two tracks in Milwaukee Road yard. Track number one was long enough to hold a ribbon rail train. So I mean, normally ribbon rail trains about 3,500 foot. So, and then track number two paralleled that one was just a little bit shorter. But we used Milwaukee Yard to keep maintenance away stuff in. We just refer to it as Milwaukee Yard as the maintenance away shit yard. That's exactly what it got called lots of times. This maintenance away stuff was a pain because they would get all this stuff in, but they were never ready to use it when it came, and we always had to find a place to stash it until we were ready for it. Now, this is a diagram I made to give you an idea of the traffic flow in and out of Everett Yard. From the north, coming out of Canada, we had interchange off the Canadian National, the Canadian Pacific, the British Columbia Railway, the Southern Railway of British Columbia, and then the BN had a big customer base also up in Canada. From Bellingham, we had the traffic. We had some local traffic in Bellingham, but most of the traffic came from the Cherry Point subdivision. On the Cherry Point line, there was two oil refineries, an Alcoa aluminum plant that produced a lot of traffic at this time. And in the line, we had a branch line out to Sumas and left the main line at Mount Vernon. At this time in Sumas, we were connecting with the Canadian Pacific, the Southern Railway of British Columbia, and the BN has a big local business base in Sumas. There's so much business in Sumas, there is a Sumas switch engine station there Monday through Friday. Now, the reason why we connected with the SRY at both Sumas and at New Westminster, British Columbia is the SRY originally was an interurban line, and they got, I think it's a 3 or 3.5% grade coming out of the Fraser River Valley to get up to the Sumas area and on into Chilliwack. So all the cars for the interchange to the east end of the SRY, they took delivery of them off of us at Sumas, so they wouldn't have to haul them up that grade. And then from Burlington, we had the traffic that come off of Fidalgo Island, which is most people think of as being part of Anacortes. There's two oil refineries out there that produce a lot of traffic. You know, and all this traffic flowed into Delta Yard in Everett. Then in Delta Yard, we sorted it. Delta Yard had 13 tracks, and we built 18 blocks every day on those 13 tracks to leave on outbound trains. So from Delta, we had trains going to Seattle, We had a daily train going to Portland in the UP. That would, most of the time that went to the UP Albina yard. It'd be an Everett to Albina, and then there'd be sometimes the UP would decide to take a different yard. In Portland, the name would change, but most of the time it was the Everett to Albina. And then we had a train that went. This train it changed from time to time. Sometimes it was the Everett to Vancouver, Everett, Vancouver, Washington, with the set out Longview and Tacoma. Other times it was the Everett to Longview. Most of the time it was the Everett Longview. There was so much traffic going to Longview. And that train normally would have a Tacoma set out on it when it left Everett. And then at this time, we were running 2 trains a day to Pasco, to Everett to Pasco's. One in the morning and one normally we call about 10 o'clock at night. And we had our daily Everett to Spokane train. So that was the flow of traffic out of Everett Terminal in the early 2000s. So here we can give you an overview of what we had going on. L stood for local, NWE stood for the New West Division. And the 626 train was our hauler train that took traffic to Bellingham and Cherry Point. The train originated in Custer, brought all the traffic down from the branch out of Cherry Point, picked up at Bellingham, come into Everett, dropped this train off at Delta Yard, then the power ran around the Bayside Yard, picked its outbound 626 train up at Bayside, and then it returned back to Bellingham, where it tied up in the south siding at Bellingham. Then we had train 644 was the daily train. It was normally called, to call time change for time, but most of the time it was either called for 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And it ran to Sumas and back every night. Took the cars up there for the Sumas switcher to interchange the SRY. This time we were still interchanging with the CP at Sumas. That would later be changed, so they would take all of their interchange to at New Westminster. They eliminated their interchange there at Sumas. But this time 644 was lots of nights. It left with anywhere from 100 to 120 cars out of Bayside to go to Sumas. We have a train we call the Thornwood Turn that was on duty at 10 p.m. That took all of the cars up to Burlington to go out onto the island, and also for all the local industries in the Burlington area. And then we had that time we had coming in was called the BBC to Everett. That was a train that originated at Vancouver, British Columbia. The power tied up in what we called the Glen Yard, which is a 6-track yard in downtown Vancouver, BC, right next to the Via Rail passenger station there. And at that time we had a barge slip operation that we sent traffic via barge to 5 different paper mills out on Vancouver Island. So the barge traffic would get picked up from the Glen Yard with the VBC to Everett. They would then come to New Westminster, pick up the local traffic at New Westminster, and go over to Brownsville. And at Brownsville, we had a connection there with the British Columbia Railroad. The BC Rail would operate over Canadian National tracks out of North Vancouver, get on our tracks, and then operate on the BNSF tracks to Brownsville. And we had two interchange tracks at Brownsville. They would set out their train on one track, then they would pick up their cars at Brownsville to go back. And then we had coming off the Canadian National every day, we had a PRG to Everett. That was the Prince George to Everett train. And then we had a Edmonton to Everett train. They both come out of the CN yard at Surrey with Canadian traffic. Primarily lumber and propane gas were the two heaviest commodities on those two trains. And then the trains we departed from Everett every day. They'll start at midnight. The Everett to Everett was always a 0001, 12:01 a.m. call train. That train operated down to Interbay Yard in Seattle and back every night. It was our hauler train. It hauled traffic for the Seattle area, and also it was the train that ferried locomotives back and forth between Everett and the Interbay Roundhouse. Then we had the Gold Bar turn I talked about earlier. He was on duty at 8 a.m. and he went to this time he was originating in Delta Yard, and he would go out the NP main normally and sort his cars out using the Turkey Trail switch there. And in the Boeing job, in the early 2000s, came on duty in Everett, Delta Yard at 10 a.m. because we were getting cars down off the Canadian National and into Delta Yard to go up to the Boeing plant at this time. Then the first Everett to Pasco train was a mid-morning call. Normally, we call them around 10 a.m. And then we had the Everett to Spokane. At this time, the Everett Spokane crew come out of Interbay Yard with light engines handled, and it was always 5 big pumpkins, and they were set up for DP power, 3 on the front and 2 to be cut in mid-train. And let's see, we should go back and show you this. That train would go out to Lowell, the power would go out to Lowell, and then they would back down the NP main, back down to Sea Line Junction, back on into GN Junction, and they would back into Delta Yard to pick up their train. And then when they left, they would depart via the NP main back to Lowell to head on to Wenatchee. The Everett was a garbage train. It was normally called for 2 p.m. Then we had the Everett Albina, was late afternoon call, normally around 5 to 6, somewhere in there. We would call him out. And then we had the Everett to Longview normally, and we would call that normally directly behind the Everett Albina. Those are two trains would basically lead back to back. That would maybe an hour and a half between them. And then we had the second Everett to Pasco was running at this time because there was just so much lumber traffic coming down from Canada, and we normally gave that a 10 o'clock call. So again, you can see where we're talking about. Everything come out of here. And this is where we sorted everything out, just remember. And this will give you an idea of how we did it. We had 13 tracks in Delta Yard. Track number 1 was called the slough track. And slough is a term I've only heard out here in the Pacific Northwest. Okay, it's common out here, but I never heard anywhere else. Everybody else called it the whole track or called it the no-build track. But track number 1 is where all of the whole cars went that either there were no bills, maintenance away cars, waiting for us to do something with them, or empties coming in to go to industries that weren't ready to be spotty yet, anything that had to be held. Then tracks 2 through 8 is where we built our 18 blocks every day. And so we would build trains in these tracks, and outbound trains would be 2 tracks, and then the outbound, we try to build them on tracks beside each other, so that way it was easier for the carmen to work the train for the outbound bad orders. So the trains departed out of the same tracks that they were built in. And then we had tracks 10 through 13. We used those as our arrival tracks. The train would come in and double over. And normally, like you pull in 13, double to 12, or you pull in 11, double to 10. That's how we normally did it. And after a train arrived, the inbound train would be given to the carman. The carman would blue flag the arriving train, and they would work it. It would take about an hour to an hour and a half for them to work an inbound train. Then they would give us a list of all the bad orders in the train to go to the RIP track. And the same thing on departures. The carman would, once we got done building an outbound train, we would give it to the carman, was the term we used, and the carman would blue flag it, and they would work the outbound trains. There wasn't very many bad orders in outbound trains, so we tried to catch them on the inbound trains. And if there was any bad orders, then the outbound crew, not the switch crew, the outbound crew set out the bad orders as they were doubling the train over and pulling out of town. We had a RIP tracks over here we talked about. And then we had the roundhouse tracks down here. Main line. This track here, it's missing on it. There was a crossover actually. This crossover was here. And this was called the short lead. I think at one time it might have gone down here, connect somehow. I don't know, but this is where at this time we would build the Boeing job would get built on this track, and the gold bar turn would get built on that track. The scale track was where we would tie up the switch engines on, and basically this is how we got from the yard into the yard office with the yard power. And Banco was over here. Now the Rogers the old Rogers track, that's where the inbound garbage train would leave its train. I think it's still doing it to this day that way. And then the new Rogers track is where, as we switched the Robanco plant facility here, we switched it twice a day. And as we pull cars out of the Robanco facility, we would put them into the new Rogers and begin building the outbound Everett route that way. This is the Everett Yard office, one of the finest buildings of the BNSF. Originally, this building had a second story and it caught on fire. Mike Sullivan was the yard master. Mike managed to put the fire out before it burned the entire building down, and the bridge and building department was really mad at him. They wanted this building to burn to the ground. They didn't want to have to rebuild it, but they ended up taking the second story off and salvaging the building. And this is what we had. The yardmaster's office originally was right in here. And this was the crew lunchroom and locker room was in the lockers were in here. And then as traffic grew, we outgrew it. So the railroad took a couple of maintenance away univans, put them behind this building. And the first univan was the yardmaster's office. The second univan was the trainmaster's office. The old yardmaster's office up here, then that's where all the computers and the printers and fax machine and photocopy machine went there, and then the rest of this was made into a crew lunchroom over here. This is the Delta Yard switch engines. Job 101 on duty at 7 a.m. First thing they did was they went down the Rogers main and they pulled whatever garbage cars had been loaded after the Everett left the afternoon before, and set them into the new Rogers. And then they filled up the River Banco with empty garbage cars out of the old Rogers. And then they would spend the rest of their shift switching from the east end of Delta Yard. Then job 102 on duty at 8. He switched from the west end of Delta Yard. So all day we had a crew working the east and the west end of Delta Yard. Then in the afternoon, job 201 came on duty at 3. Again, he switched to east end of the yard. Job 202 come on duty at 4. He switched to west end of the yard. And then we added a third job on second trick just because of there was so much traffic coming down for us to be able to handle it. So job 204 come on duty at 3:05. And his first duty of the day was go over and he would switch to rip tracks. Most rip tracks got switched once a day, normally at the end of the carman's first trick. Normally the heavy repair work was all done on first trick, and second and third trick, carman basically handled inbound and outbound track inspections in the yards. So they would switch to rips, then they would go over and they would fill up empty garbage cars into the Robanco plant again after the Everett departed. Give them some garbage cars to load in the afternoon until they went home. I think they went home around 6. Then they would go switch. We had a track called the Kimberly-Clark log dump track. It was between GN Junction and the Railroad Avenue crossing. That's way back in the days. Kimberly-Clark got logs when they had a log dump back there on the Snohomish River. And they had a chipper someplace they chipped these logs. But at this time, what was going on is Kimberly-Clark was buying used railroad ties off the railroad, and these ties would come in top bottom coal hoppers, the older drop bottom coal hoppers from the Powder River Basin, and Kimberly-Clark had a grapple crane over there to lift these ties up out of the cars, and they had this big machine they dropped the ties into, and the ties would get ground up, and they would and they referred to them as being hog fuel. And Kimberly-Clark was burning them in their boilers on the other side of town. They'd truck them across town. And then job 204 would go up to PA Junction, to the old GN Freight House spur up there. This spur held 2 60-foot box cars, and there was a company that was getting box cars of plywood in up there, and 2 or 3 times a week we go up there and we'd have to put in loads of plywood and pull the empties. And then when they got back down the yard, the rest of the shift, when job 201 went to lunch, they would take over switching east in the yard. And then when job 202 went to lunch, they would go and switch down at the west end of the yard. That way we just continually kept switching Delta yard, both ends. We had to keep up. That time we were getting 500 to 600 cars a day in the Delta yard. We could very comfortably handle 500. But when we got to 600 cars, it was the railroad slowed down. We just started to bog down, switching 600 cars a day at Delta. And if we got 650 cars inventory in the yard, we were in trouble. We really were. Then the yard really bogged down, and we would start getting behind because we didn't have any room to work. Then on third trick, we had job 301. He come on duty at 10:59 p.m. He switched to east end of the yard, and they built the gold bar turn. And also they put on it. They also built the Boeing job runway. And then job 302 come on duty at 11:59, and they would switch from the west end of the yard. And they would also do the yard-to-yard transfer from Delta Yard to Bayside Yard every night. We talked about that before. They go over to long siding, leave the cars out of Delta long siding, and pick up cars from Bayside Yard and bring them back into Delta Yard. And then on the other side of town, we had our yard jobs at Bayside. At Bayside, we had job 103 on duty at 7. At Bayside, we switched from the south end of the yard. And they would start building the 644 train, the 626 train, and the Thornwood turn on first trick. With the cars that come over on, they would go up and pull the yard-to-yard transfer down if it hadn't been pulled down already. And then at the second trick, come on duty at 3, they would finish building the 626 and the Thornwood train. And then after the 644 left and free some space up in the yard, they could go down to set out track, and they would pull the Spokane to Everett train into Bayside Yard to be switched out. And they also did the local industry work. They would switch out Kimberly-Clark paper mill, and they would pull and spot the cars down at the Alcoa aluminum plant when that was shipping. Alcoa wasn't an everyday thing. It just depended upon when ships come in and whether they had bulk ore to send over to Wenatchee or not. So that was there was an ebb and flow to that changed a lot. Then we had a third trick job over at Bayside. They come on duty 11:59, and they would pull the yard transfer into the yard normally from the long siding, and they would start switching and blocking the stuff that was in the yard from that, and they would build the Conway turn that was on duty at 7:01. And the Conway turn operated Monday through Friday, and at that time, on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, it went up the Arlington branch, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays, it went to Mount Vernon. Now, coming into Bayside, right here. Coming into Bayside, we had our third trick yard-to-yard transfer. Then the Everett to Everett coming back from Seattle, he would pull his train up the main line at Bayside, drop it off there, and then take his power around to the roundhouse in Delta. And we switched that out, and this BOEB was set out into the set out track at Howard Junction, and then that would get pulled up and on second trick normally, and that would get switched and built into outbound trains. And then the Conway turn, we just talked about, is on duty at 7 a.m. And then once the traffic stopped coming down from Canada for the Boeing plant, say probably it might have been like around 2002, and the Boeing job was transferred over to run out of Bayside Yard. So the engines and the caboose for the Boeing job were kept on the scale track at Bayside. They would come on duty at 10 a.m., get their power. They would go down to the Port Everett, and they go out on the Boeing pier, pick up the loaded container cars for the Boeing plant off the pier, and go down to milepost 31 and pick up there. And then they would back up the hill, caboose first, and up to 5.5% grade up into the Boeing plant. The interesting thing about the Boeing job was that some of the containers were 22 feet wide. So from the pier down to Mukilteo, all the switch stands were down low. All the signals were set farther away from the main line than normal to clear these 22-foot wide containers. And anytime there was a Boeing job was going to or from Mukilteo, all other train traffic stopped and was held. The dispatcher had to put a what we call the block up on the other main line that the Boeing was not using. That way no trains could be lined in against the Boeing job, because these containers fouled both main tracks. And 644 train to Sumas, they were on duty at Delta normally at 2:30 p.m. Sometimes it got changed to 3, but normally it was 2:30. And then the Thornwood turn, the hauler train to Burlington, that was on duty at 10 p.m. And then 626, we had him coming down from Custer. He normally arrive around midnight, 1 o'clock. Then he'd come around after he dropped his train off at Delta. If we were swapping out any power for the locals in Bellingham, he went to the roundhouse, and then the roundhouse would work the power, and then he would come out and go around to Bayside Yard, pick up his train, and go back to Bellingham. So the Boeing job, people are always asking about the Boeing job. I was basically telling you about it, how the tool cars this time come down from Canada, and they come up from California. We got them off the SP at Portland. They come up in freight service. They got set out at milepost 31, and then there we had the tool cars that come in from Kansas, and they also got set out at milepost 31 from the freight trains that they came in on. And they would, so when they come back down the Boeing plant, it's interesting because of that, the 5.5% grade on Boeing Hill, that was the steepest hill on the entire railroad. And coming down that hill, down towards about 2/3 of the way down, there was an automatic derail. It was a split point derail. It was always set in a derailing position. If the Boeing job was doing less than 7 miles an hour coming down the hill, then there's a switch motor on that derail, which would then line it to go down the hill. If the Boeing job was going over 7 miles an hour, then it went into the ditch. Never happened, but that's the way it was set up, because if the Boeing job got going over 7 miles an hour, they would never stop when they got down to the bottom of the hill at Mukilteo, and they would just fly through the red signals and out onto the main line. And that was the reason for that. So they would always back caboose first and back into Everett, working in milepost 31, and they would spot empties in the Boeing dock, and then they would back on in the Bayside yard and tie their power caboose up on the scale track at Bayside. Let's talk a little bit about what we've been doing here and how are you going to apply that to your model railroad. Okay. Now, one thing you've seen here is that prototype operations, we have a predictable flow. The key to running an efficient yard is you do the same thing, the same way, every shift, every day. Everybody gets into a habit and things flow. And everything's predictable. That's going to happen on every shift. There's so many times when you go to the model railroad operating session, it's like there's a yard, figure out what to do. There's no real plan. There's no predictable flow to a model railroad yard. So, stop and think about what your yard doing and the sequence of things have to happen in that yard for inbound trains and outbound trains to be arrived and departed. So, we have what we call transportation service, TSP, Transportation Service Plan on the railroad. Every train that operates has a TSP, and it's a schedule. There was a time when we really tried to follow those schedules, and what time the train was called, what time the train departed, how many horsepower per ton, the maximum footage the train could run at. All this stuff was, and every set out and pickup it made on its entire route. So, sort of make a plan, because most model railroaders, we just don't make a plan. It's just, there it is. Let's do it. Let's get our cards and let's go out there and run trains. So plan the arrival sequence of your inbound train for switching into your outbounds. And plan your outbounds to take advantage of the inbound traffic as it's coming. And plan for that. So while you're switching, you're planning and you're building you're actually building trains to start your next operating session. Like on the prototype, we have to always think at least 12 hours in advance. We got to be, what we're doing now is going to affect what happens in the yard 8 to 12 hours from now. We always have to be thinking in advance of the effects of what we're doing now. And then on the prototype, we think in yard blocks. Okay, we switch our inbound cars into what we call yard blocks. Like at Everett, we'd have a Albina yard block, we'd have a Longview block, a Tacoma block, a Seattle block, a Spokane block, a Wenatchee block, a Pasco block. At times, we would even have a Northtown block. And then the blocks were then put together into outbound trains. Like if we were building the Everett to Longview, we'd have our Tacoma block, and then we'd have our Longview block making up the outbound train, for example. And also, most prototype yards depart the train from the same track that we built it in. From the class, people think of it as class tracks. We just think of it as yard tracks. You see so many model railroaders, and they're being told in the magazines, you're going to have an inbound and outbound arrival departure tracks, and you're going to switch your trains into class tracks, and then you're going to have your switch engine drag it out of the class tracks and put it into a departure tracks. We don't do that. Only the big hump yards do that. Okay, and the smaller yards, which is what most model railroads represent, we depart our trains out of the tracks that they were built in. If you stop and think of it from the model railroad, the time you spend with your switch engine, pulling the train out of the yard track and putting it into a departure track, your road power could have come out of the roundhouse, your engine house, whatever, gotten on that train, where it's made up, coupled into it, and left. So basically, it's just a make work project for the switch engine, is the way I look at it. So let's just let our model trains depart from where they're made up. And that's basically it, guys. So any questions?
Thank you so much, Bob. I kept thinking of operating on Burr Stewart's layout while you were talking about all those things. And I really like what you said at the end about designing your home layout. I really appreciate what your presentation. Anybody have questions?
This is Burr. I have a question about milepost 31 yard. What I understand, Bob, from what you said, is that they would come down the hill from Boeing and then sort the cars by north and south, basically. I mean,
No, east and west. Yeah.
east and west, really. West would be towards Seattle. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and east. So,
And east was cars going to Kansas.
and then they would leave them all there.
Right.
Is that right? And
Correct.
then they would just go home.
No,
No, well, you're talking, I know there was the dock in Everett.
Sure.
But before there was a dock in Everett, it was a whole different operation, right? They would take all the cars to Delta and switch them out.
I couldn't tell you because when I come to Everett in October of 2000,
Right.
the way
So-
we did, I couldn't tell you what was done before then.
Right. So 25 years earlier, that's what I'm trying to figure out is, were they making that train up in Bayside or Delta? I don't think that track was even there at milepost, that
Well, that
extra
track
track.
in milepost 31's been there for years. That
Both of them though, right? Didn't they
yeah,
add a
both of
track?
those- Yeah, both of those were there because originally there was oil tanks there.
Oh, that's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
there was a dock there that got in petroleum products of some kind, and they
Right.
loaded in the tank cars.
Did they have a scale up at Boeing, or did they weigh the cars at Bayside if they had
We
to?
didn't weigh them.
Oh, because it was a contract kind of thing.
It was all shippers weight agreement.
Yeah, okay.
Now the Boeing plant does have a turntable up there.
Right,
There was a one time we had to wire the cars at Delta Junction
right.
and get them all lined up before, because I guess, back in the day, yeah, you're right. The Boeing job would have come out of Delta.
Yeah. Somebody told me they would turn the cars on the turntable or low, or you said on the Y. They would just turn them on the Y to get them going the right direction to back up the hill.
Correct.
Because they didn't, but before they built the turntable at Boeing.
Yeah, that was a switch engine job doing that. That was yard work.
Wasn't that because of the way the doors were, because
Yeah.
they had to have the doors a certain way?
The Boeing tool cars only have doors at one end. So when you get up to the Boeing plant, the doors have to be facing towards the building. And then there was so much delay to the cars getting them wide, and eventually the Boeing bought a turntable and installed the
Yeah.
turntable up there. I think they bought it when the Milwaukee Road folded up.
Another interesting challenge of model railroading, I was just thinking about this. If I had 5 cars going to go on the jet job to Boeing, and I needed the operator or somebody to turn those cars so that the doors were all facing the right direction, that could take a person like an hour and a half.
I'd
Just
be
to-
willing to do that.
Yeah, and of course, on the railroad, that was just the switch job you were assigned, right?
Yeah,
But
well,
in a
yeah, that's how comes we
Yeah,
pressured into getting a turntable.
yeah, exactly. But I mean, on the model railroad, it's like, I can just picture someone saying, really? I'm going to sit here and screw around with individual cars on the turntable just to run this short local. And I'm thinking, yeah, we're trying to make it realistic here. But it's not efficient.
Not at all.
No,
Yeah, when the Boeing job gets up there, if any cars are facing in the wrong direction, then the conductor operates the turntable.
Another question I had is there was some sort of a reload operation on the north side of Bridge 12, right? I think it was the Weiser reload, what it was called.
Oh, well, Weiser was in Marysville. It's on the old house track at Marysville, and they
Oh.
are still
Oh, okay, they're still doing it.
loading there.
What local job handles that?
Back in those days, it was the Conway turn. And
Yep.
now the business is growing so much on the Arlington branch, it's a 5-day work, 5 days a week. So it's, I think they're calling it the Arlington turn now.
Okay.
You're working the branch 5 days a week.
Is the Conway turn, is it also the Arlington turn, or are those two separate jobs?
Well, it depends on your time period. Back when I was working, the Conway turn went up the Arlington branch 3 times a week and went to Mount Vernon 2 times a week. Then probably around 2012 or so, then it changed, going 5 days a week up the Arlington branch. And then by then the asphalt at the facility down at Richmond Beach was getting phased out. And then the Gold Bar turn started going to Conway instead of the Conway turn, and if they went to Conway and Mount Vernon. Now today, that's all being done by the road switcher out of Mount Vernon. The railroad changes, constant change.
So do they have a switcher dedicated up in Mount Vernon for that?
There are 3 road switchers based out of Mount Vernon, first, second, and third trick. And the day job normally, I understand now, is doing the Mount Vernon work and the Conway work.
Okay, that sounds good.
The power used in the different yards, whether it was Bayside or Delta, were they really switch engines? Or were they road engines just had to have more power?
Originally, everything up in Everett was SW switchers. And what I heard is, remember Stu Gordon telling me this, they had the SW switchers and the tonnage just got too heavy for the SWs. So they were doubling the tracks over at Delta on the back lead there one day. And one of those SW switchers actually threw a piston. It was just too much. That was the day that they decided to replace the SW switchers with the GP39Ms, the modified Jeeps.
Okay.
So everything became Jeeps.
What was the year time frame on that?
Around about 1998, 1999.
Okay, thanks.
Because when I got there in October, when I got there in 2000, everything was Jeeps. And it had just happened maybe a year before that.
You mentioned how you should depart out of your classification tracks. So you've already got a layout built with the arrival departure. Well, what's your solution? Stick with the arrival departure.
That is your arrival track.
Yep.
Oh, another thing to think about is switching too. Now, when we switch a train, we don't pull an entire track out and switch it. We bring it out in what we call cuts. You remember, you got 6 inches of slack in every set of couplers. So we bleed the air off. When the carman works the inbound train, they also bleed the air off the cars. So when we pull the cars out to switch them, there's no air on them. We normally come out with maybe 10 to 15 car cuts, and that's what we use to switch on the lead with, because you're going to race the engine, basically slam on the brakes, pull the pin, and let the cars roll. Okay, that's how we do it. Think of it that way. But at a model railroad, we can't kick and let the cars roll. Okay, so really, if you get your inbound train, break it into 2 or 3 pieces and switch it.
Okay.
Don't pull the entire train out, a big long lead, and keep pushing the whole train up.
Do you remember a lot of that just off the top of your head, like of how, well, like the times and how things worked?
Yeah.
That's what it seemed like.
Yeah,
And
I
that's
got
really impressive.
I got notes here, but I never even read it. Okay.
Yeah, I was watching you while you were talking, and I didn't see you reading notes, and it made me think about like how because you did the same thing every day and everything was timed and all that. How long of a shift did you typically work?
12 hours.
Okay.
We work from 6 to 6, a month of days, a month of nights, a month of days, a month of nights.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. This was really interesting. I really enjoyed this presentation. It was really lovely seeing everybody, and thank you again, Bob, for doing the presentation. And so next month's presentation on Thursday, April 6th is tentatively Larry Sloan presenting on how to build a Fremo module. And have a pleasant evening and enjoy your trains. Bye-bye.
Bye.